For the last 10 or so years, the idea of live service games has been met with tired groan, sighs of exasperation, and unwelcome flashbacks to a seemingly infinite number of server shutdown announcements. The ugly cousin of early access, live service has felt like an excuse for developers to release games in an unfinished state, with PR teams promising that it'll be better later, we swear, while the little that exists gets loaded up with battle passes, premium currencies, and any other microtransactions that some greedy corporate executive read about in the latest issue of How to Exploit Your Consumer Base. Imagine my surprise then when I booted up Helldivers 2 for the first time just over a year ago and found a game that, while being guilty of several of the things I just complained about, is one of my favorite games of the decade, and I've only been alive for 2 of those, so that's some pretty high praise. I could chalk it up to a simple case of shoot gun feel good, but that both wouldn't be satisfying and wouldn't make for a good video, so instead, I'm gonna spend the next 15 or so minutes delving into how Helldivers 2 has used the strengths of live service to actually make a game a whole lot better. Let's start with the thing that every gun-toting, grenade-throwing, squid-shooting, bug and bot-blasting spreader of managed democracy loves more than anything else: the lore. Now, that would be an insane thing to say about basically any other live service game on the market, and if I'm being honest, it's not entirely true here either, but it's a far bigger part of the experience than you might expect, and all because of the unique way in which it's told. Ask about the lore in any other game, and the answers will probably come from some story-obsessed nerd who owns physical copies of all the in-game texts, footage unrelated. If you want your questions answered in Helldivers, though, you'll get just as much help from that guy as you do from, well, the person who's probably responsible for whatever you're talking about. See, when you first boot up Helldivers, you'll probably get pulled into the squad of whoever just convinced you to drop $40 on yet another multiplayer shooter, and end up going straight into gameplay without much in the way of story. You'll probably get the hyper-patriotic vibe from the tutorial and loading screens, and maybe some basic info on whatever enemy you happen to be ripping to shreds at the moment. But by the end of the session, you won't really have any burning questions about anything story-related. That'll change, however, once you start paying attention to what happens at this funny little table right here. The war table has to be the best mission select I have ever seen, and it's entirely because of how it pulls you into the story of this game. Off the bat, it gives you some easily digestible info. There are 3 different factions occupying 3 different areas, all surrounding Super Earth. The sizes of the enemy areas may vary depending on what faction is making plays or which one we just beat up, but it serves as an easy-to-read intro for how the overall war is going at any given moment. What's most important, though, is that I'm sure just by looking at whatever screenshot I've put up on screen, you've already developed a few questions. Why do the planets at the bottom have warning signs? What's with the giant fart cloud in the top right? Why is there a black hole with a bunch of destroyed planets next to it that's awfully close to the Earth? And who glassed Mars? The answers to these questions are not in the game, unless there's some sort of operation logbook in the corner that I'm unaware of. There's actually no system present to explain this stuff to you, but that doesn't mean it's time to pull up the Google search bar just yet. Remember, this game is co-op. You're probably in VC with 3 friends, or at least in game chat with 3 randoms, at least one of whom probably has experience with the game, and even the most lore-averse player will be able to explain a few of those strange events for no other reason than that they were there when they happened. When Helldivers 2 released back in 2024, the war table looks something like this, which is pretty lacking by today's standards. Both the bot and bug territories are way smaller, the squids are nowhere to be seen, and Mars is not yet on fire, and the reason is because the story simply hasn't happened yet. Sure, there was an entire Helldivers 1 campaign to read up on, but as far as the average player was concerned, the plot began and ended at "there are bugs and bots that want to shoot you, shoot them first." Over the first couple months, though, the developers at Arrowhead made full use of the live service model to tell a story in live time. Players would get updates every couple of days about a new threat or objective through major orders, community-wide objectives that, if not achieved, could lead to disastrous consequences. Maybe the bugs were attacking cities on Angel's Venture, or the bots were building some sort of doomsday machine, or the bugs were attacking Angel's Venture again. There were constantly new things happening, and in the year since, the pace hasn't slowed down, and this has allowed the developers to craft a story that builds on itself at an incredible pace, keeping players involved every step of the way. For example, back in March of 2024, players deployed to multiple planets in an event called Operation Termicide to activate the Terminid control system, something that would hopefully keep the bugs sectioned off. In late April, however, a new strain of Terminids appeared that had mutated due to said control systems and were rapidly reproducing, especially on a planet called Meridia. Players were constantly dealing with this threat all through April until the end of May, where they deployed en masse to Meridia and pumped it full of dark fluid, turning it into that black hole on the war map I pointed out earlier. It then just kinda sat there, occasionally making weird black hole noises until December, when the Illuminate, the guys we got the dark fluid that made the planet go boom from, popped out of the singularity and started using it to kick our butts. Using a bunch of dark energy that we failed to stop them from gathering, they somehow pushed the Meridian Singularity through a bunch of planets, including Angel's Venture, destroying them completely. Side note, you can still visit these planets and just kind of look at them a little bit. I just think that's neat. But yeah, in April of 2025, the Meridian Singularity was finally stopped, what I like to call way too close to Super Earth, and the following month, a bunch of Illumina popped out of it and began an invasion of our home base, glassing Mars and a few other planets on the way. They pulled out a bunch of new tools for the invasion, like these flying ships that look just like those guys from the first Avengers movie, but they have guns now, but after a full week of fighting, we finally managed to fend them off, and Super Earth was safe once more. That was a whole lot of lore, and realistically, I probably lost a good number of viewers reciting all that, but I need you to understand. I don't know any of that stuff because I googled it on the wiki or fell asleep to a VOD video. All of this info came from either me playing the game and watching the major orders roll in live time, or asking a friend who was there when I wasn't. I've seen this style of storytelling compared to D&D, and while I do think that's a bit of a stretch, I get where it's coming from. The developers function as a DM, constructing the narrative basically on the fly while responding to the community's feedback on what they actually want the story to be about. And like any good game, the players aren't limited to just using their words. Their engagement with the game itself can have an effect on what happens, and there's no better example of this than the events that transpired on Malevelon Creek. If you've spent any amount of time interacting with the Helldivers community, you've probably heard of Malevelon Creek at least 17 times. Look on the map now, and it's just another planet under human control that doesn't even have anything to fight on it. Go back a little over a year, though, and you'll find legions of Helldivers completing mission after mission on the planet, dying over and over and over again to the massive bot threat. There wasn't any sort of objective here or anything. Half the time the major orders weren't even about the bots at all, but people loved the environment of the planet, and with how difficult fighting the bots was at the time, the idea of capturing and defending the planet became a giant goal the entire community rallied around. This led to the creation of fan-made memes, posters, and even songs, all inspired by the events of the Creek, and the developers responded by effectively canonizing all of it. Malevelon Creek effectively became a massive piece of in-game propaganda, and after months of fighting, the developers announced a major order to take the Creek from the bots once and for all. The success of this mission was accompanied by massive community-wide celebration, and again, the developers joined in, continuing to support what was effectively player-made lore by creating a unique commemorative cape only available to those who participated in the capture. This amount of collaborative player-developer storytelling is only possible because of some very specific conditions. The roleplay-friendly world where every individual player is canon, the willingness of the devs to engage with the community, and of course, the live service model allowing them to effectively reflect the community's creations in-game. It's hard to say all the effort wasn't worth it though, especially when you have posts like this from people outside the community who can't even tell if lore is official or not, proving how deeply player opinion is valued in this game's progression. You can argue that Malevelon Creek was a lightning in a bottle moment, and that the creators at Arrowhead just got lucky, but while they didn't have control over the community's response itself, they are responsible for creating the system that allowed them to capitalize on it, something unique to Helldivers that you can't really find anywhere else. Now, I think I've made it pretty clear at this point that I'm a massive fan of this storytelling style, but I haven't even mentioned the greatest part yet, the way you actually engage with it. See, all the stuff I've talked about so far is really neat, but it's also not entirely unique. A lot of live service titles have ongoing stories, and while the players might not be creating the lore themselves, the creators are still releasing a story in live time, with communities celebrating successes and mourning defeats. Players are actively engaging in important story events all the time, often through killing important bosses or clearing major events, but the thing is, they don't really have any influence on the actual outcome. More often than not, any boss a developer creates was created to lose, to be beaten by at least a subsection of players, and the story will continue on with that success as the canon outcome. Helldivers 2, on the other hand, lets players take control over their successes, and potentially their failures. See, back when I was giving that rundown of the story a bit ago, and I mentioned that the Illuminate were pushing the Meridian Singularity with a bunch of dark energy that we failed to stop them from gathering, I was being very literal. In February of 2025, the developers tasked the player base with protecting 11 planets from Illuminate invasion, as the dark energy the Illuminate were using came from those invasions. By the end of the Major Order, we only held 9 of the 11 planets, and as a result, Angel's Venture was destroyed. You can argue however much you want about the devs potentially fudging the numbers or making impossible goals to nudge the story in a particular direction, but the fact remains, when you complete a mission on a planet, you influence the capture or defense rate of that planet. Even if it's only by a fraction of a percent, you were arguably a part of the community-wide attempt to achieve whatever the current goal is. And that's something that almost no other game on the market can claim. It inspires the sense of ownership in every individual player, letting accomplishments and defeats feel incredibly personal, something that's traditionally very difficult for a single story to do for thousands of people at once. It's a form of immersion so effective that it feels like cheating, cause you're not mad that the aliens blew up a planet. You're mad that they blew up a planet that you helped capture, and you were the one that failed to stop them. Your contribution was small, but it was yours, and that unique personal feeling is a massive part of why what is basically a simple space invasion story has captured such a massive audience. Of course, even if it is one of the game's greatest achievements, I can't sit here and talk about the story forever. After all, live service wasn't just made so developers could play space D&D, it was also made so producers could make more money. The genre enables a constant influx of content, sure, but it also acts as a gateway for more aggressive monetary practices. Subscription services, season passes, you don't need me to list all these out because you're almost definitely familiar with at least 10 more examples, and unfortunately, Helldivers is no exception. Or, well, at least that's what it looks like at first. Yes, this game has a premium currency known as super credits you can purchase from the store. Yes, this game has a war bond system that looks an awful lot like a bunch of battle passes, and yes, they can only be bought with the super credits, and that's on top of the standalone store that will sell individual items that, again, you can only get with the premium currency. This is honestly pretty standard fare for a live service title, but being met with this after forking over $40 was a bit annoying. No matter how commonplace it's becoming, being told you have to pay more money for the game that you thought you already owned is a pain. Of course, that was before I booted up my first mission and was greeted with a container chock full of super credits. So this is the part of the video where I would absolutely love to have the financial data for Helldivers 2, because it is entirely possible to get whatever content you want in this game without giving up a single penny. The free war bond has 750 credits, and by the time I'd finished that, I'd randomly found the remaining 250 needed for, and this is important, literally any premium war bond in the entire game. FOMO is the terrifyingly effective and incredibly manipulative tactic, and Arrowhead has made the incredible decision to forego its use completely. As of writing, there are 13 premium war bonds for players to obtain, with new ones coming out at a rough pace of once per month, and there are currently no plans to make any of them unavailable for the foreseeable future. FOMO for this game does actually exist, but it's for the story, not the content. Aside from the rotating shop, which rotates through everything so frequently it hardly even counts, everything is available all the time, something I really cannot appreciate enough. Now, before people accuse me of being paid off by having exactly 10,000 super credits deposited into my account on the 20th of June 2025, I have to make something clear. For the most part, you will not be obtaining the content of these war bonds if you're free to play. The game gives you plenty of currency to grab the one you want the most, but after 100 hours of playing, I own a grand total of 2. You can intentionally farm for more, and after having done so myself for research, and also because I needed the funny taser drone, I can tell you pretty confidently that it sucks. Sure, you can gather up enough credits for a war bond in one day, and with only one coming out per month, you do have plenty of people grabbing every last pass without spending a dime. But to farm efficiently, you basically just turn off all the enemies and loot the same 10 containers over and over and over again. Not to mention that devoting a full day to this isn't something that everyone can do, and frankly isn't something that anyone should do, so yeah, Arrowhead's generosity has its limits. But it's important to remember that not everyone wants every war bond. I haven't really brought up the gameplay much, but at least in my experience, players can pretty quickly identify the 1 or 2 bonds with the specific stratagems or guns they'd probably use and grab those. If they want more, $10 is all it takes. This might be a bit of a weird take, but I also kinda like limiting what different players have access to. In a Q&A on the Discord a while back, the devs stated that one of the goals with the war bonds was to provide players with different experiences, and I feel like the scarcity is what let them achieve that goal. Sure, I can't run around spewing giant green fart clouds or slash people with a fancy sword, but I'm glad to let my friends handle that while I'm setting up defenses with a flame turret and a gun so big it has its own chair. We each have our own roles that we determined with our own choices, almost like choosing a class in an MMO, and I'd almost go so far as to say that it feels like it adds to the experience instead of taking anything away. Again, not a paid shill, it is objectively taking things away from players, but between the permanent nature of the content, the ability to grab anything for free with a reasonable amount of playtime, and the option to grind out more if you really need it, it has to be one of the most consumer-friendly shops I've seen in a game in what literally might be years at this point. And of course, I can't finish this section without mentioning all the actually free content that they put out regularly. In a decision so consumer-friendly that I have to imagine it got someone fired, no update to any of the 3 enemy factions at any point in this game's lifespan has been gated with a price tag. When they gave the bots extra flamethrowers, or the bugs extra tentacles, or the squids the crazy flesh mobs that live in my nightmares, everyone got to come together and fight them in defense of Super Earth, regardless of the state of their super bank account. These enemy updates are always the most entertaining in the game. People don't really come back for the 2 new guns and the funky grenade in the new pass, they come back because the bugs have learned how to fly. The flag was cool, but players returned because Super Earth was under attack and they wanted to fight alongside their precious little Seaf soldiers and shoot Halo Banshees out of the sky. This model feels so free-to-play friendly that I'm kind of afraid it's gonna have to change at some point. I'm not exactly a financial expert, but I imagine the $40 entry fee can only carry Arrowhead so far if they're going to keep dumping resources into this game at the current pace. Even the most dedicated player has no reason to throw more than $80 into the shop as it is now, which is nothing compared to the other competitors in the space. And don't get me wrong, I absolutely love it this way, and the content itself has felt consistently high quality, but we're coming up on the 1-year mark, and I feel like some sort of change is inevitable. Speaking of, change can honestly feel like Helldivers' weakness at some points. A lot of players have expressed issues with the pace at which impactful updates come to this game, and I do understand why. It feels crazy to say after we recently had what might have been the biggest update in the history of the game with the Super Earth invasion, but even when the story is going crazy, the moment-to-moment gameplay can still feel the same as it always has. It's objectively not. Again, the bugs didn't always fly, but then again, I've been fighting the same flying bugs for over a year. Now, it's never a good idea to trust the internet when it comes to predicting if a game's going to die or not, and it is still reliably pulling in numbers day after day, but it's clear that the community isn't entirely satisfied with the pace at which impactful new content is rolled out. This is something that PvP games don't have to contend with, at least on the same level, as competition between players will always provide a goal for players to reach. In a purely PvE game, though, well, once you've cleared out your war bonds and fully decked out your ship, what's next? Sure, the major orders provide broad, community-wide goals that are great for storytelling and inspiring that ultra-democratic sense of unity, but it's hard to convince a player to hop on for a 2-hour session because we need to kill 1 billion Terminids, and the 1,000 that you kill will really make a difference. The 4-player co-op nature of the game can alleviate the problem at least a little. After all, 25,000 people aren't playing Left 4 Dead 2 right now because they want to unlock new skins, but it's an issue that's being brought up more and more in recent community discussions. The devs are doing their best to address the apparent lack of progression. They recently added leveling to all the primary weapons in the game, giving just a little more grind to those who want it, and letting people who forgot to read what iron sights were wonder why they can't aim their gun anymore. But it feels more like a band-aid than a proper fix. Is there a solution that doesn't involve pumping out insane amounts of content at an unreasonable rate? I mean, probably not. If there's anything you can count on the internet for, it's an insatiable desire for more content. But as complaints from the community grow, I can only wonder how the devs will respond. Speaking of the community, I feel like I'm obligated to bring up how passionate it can feel at times. Maybe it's because of the group-focused nature of the major orders, maybe it's because of the literal war propaganda this game uses as advertising, but point is, the community is no stranger to banding together and making sure their voices are heard. Often it's pretty lighthearted, like that time we didn't want the anti-tank mines, or the whole Malevolent Creek thing, or when we really didn't want anti-tank mines, but the community has also proven that they are very willing to work against the game when the devs are doing things they don't like. Stop me if you've heard this before, just kidding, you literally can't, it's a YouTube video, but I'm gonna start talking about what happened in May of 2024. A few months after release, the game was updated to require a PlayStation Network account link, which was physically impossible for some owners in other regions, and people review bombed the game so hard that the current review graph looks like this. Now, the change got rolled back fairly quickly, and even though they did implement a region lock that prevented some of the PSN list countries from buying the game, most of those got removed 3 days before I wrote this sentence. Unsurprisingly, people look back on this event pretty positively. The devs even considered releasing an in-game cape based off the Steam graph to honor/support the players for what they'd done, and everyone kind of agrees that this was the good outcome. So what's my point? Well, I don't really have one, not yet, but I'm interested to see how a community that reacts so strongly and effectively handles the way this game will undoubtedly evolve and change in the future. We ask for it all the time, but people also famously hate change, and I can see a world where any attempt to further monetize the game is met with massive fan backlash. Of course, the community being given a massive voice is good for making sure feedback is heard, but I'm afraid that someday, the devs are going to be put under pressure to make some unfavorable changes to keep the game meeting profit goals, and the community will rip them to shreds for it. Of course, I'm also afraid of the weird noises my fridge makes when it gets too warm, so it could be a whole lot of nothing, and I truly hope it is. But for all I know, the game could keep pumping out quality content for years without changing at this point, and regardless of how it does in the future, the game has already far outperformed what anybody expected of it. I just hope this community that's formed around it can stick together and continue to enjoy this amazing game for as long as possible. I had a lot of trouble writing this video. That's not why it took over 2 months to come out, that's just because I'm lazy, but figuring out exactly what I wanted to say about this game was challenging. Like, I didn't really talk about the gameplay much at all, which is weird because the gameplay is pretty much the whole reason I'm still playing. Everything else around that gameplay was just so interesting and unique that I felt it was more important to bring up, and I'm frankly way more interested in what you guys have to say about the future of this game than your opinions on the recoil balancing on the newest auto rifle. Of course, I could definitely say a lot about the gameplay, maybe even a whole video's worth, we'll see, but as far as unique live service discussion goes, I've about reached my limit. So please feel free to subscribe, leave a like to get this out to more people, and hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next one. See ya!